Well, my first visit in Korea, as you just said, was an official state visit in 2007. And now, in the last 2 years, I was 3 times in Korea in my capacity as co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center. And of course, it was a big step forward. Korea has a very fast development. Korea is a leading nation in many fields of technology, and also Korea is a leading nation in fighting against nuclear energy, for warfare, and for banning atomic weapons, and that is in full compliance with my personal or with the Austrian and many European countries' position. I'm happy about that position of Korea, and I wish you a further good and peaceful development. I cannot make a prognosis on the negotiations between the North and South, which are now a key element of politics, but we shall see, and we keep our fingers crossed that the reunification may be possible, as it was possible between East and Western Germany. Well, I wouldn't say that it was a turmoil. It was a disappointment that France and the Netherlands had a negative result in a referendum. On the other side, it was a big step forward that, as you mentioned, 10 and finally 12 additional and new countries joined the European Union. The European Union had a development beginning with 6 countries, then 9, then 12. Then after Austria, Sweden and Finland joined, 15, and then a jump to 27 respectively after Croatia, 28 countries. This was a big success, no doubt, but on the other hand, looking back, I must say, frankly, that it was easier to reach consensus in a union of 12 members than in a union with 27 or 28 members. The capacity for decision-making was declining. So there is a mood in Europe now, or a discussion saying we should reduce the number of decisions where animosity is necessary, where all have to agree, because that makes deciding much more difficult. This is one of the problems of the European Union of today. Well, you are right. It is a concern, and in my opinion, it has to do with the fact that right-wing nationalism was very much discredited after the end of World War II, because the roots for World War II were an aggressive right-wing nationalism. After 1945, this philosophy was totally out, and a pro-European pro-neighborhood, multilateral policy was dominating. And now in the last 10 years, for several reasons, right-wing nationalistic feelings are growing, maybe not only in Europe. The philosophy, my country first, whether it is United States first or Italy first or Austria first, is not good for international relations. And so we have to explain to people that nationalism is a philosophy of the past, and what we need is cooperation, is readiness to cope with other nations and countries and religions. And by the way, end of May, Chancellor Kurz, whom you mentioned, he lost a vote of confidence or non-confidence, and so at the moment he is not in government. We have a caretaker government, and we will have parliamentary elections on a Sunday in September, probably the 15th of September. That's a very good question, because at the beginning it seemed to be clear. The people in Great Britain have voted with a small majority in favor of the Brexit, so the Brexit must be executed. This seemed to be very clear. Then there were the difficult negotiations between Great Britain and the European Union, and it lasted many months, but finally an agreement was reached on the Brexit, and a so-called soft Brexit, because a hard Brexit has many disadvantages for both sides, for Europe and Great Britain. But then an unexpected situation came, namely there was in the British Parliament no majority for the deal, but there was no majority for other options, neither for a second referendum, nor for staying in the European Union, nor for any other proposal. So after a long time and very late, British Prime Minister resigned, and now the British have to find a new Prime Minister, and then they have to figure out not what has no majority, but figure out a project that has a majority. And then the final decision can be taken. I think at the moment the game is very open. It can be that at the end Britain will leave the European Union. It could be that they really make a second referendum, but the probability is below 50%. Well, the Helsinki process was a success story, but it is more than 40 years ago. Time have changed in the meantime. The Soviet Empire is not existing anymore. The Soviet Union dismantled to Russia and several other countries. I believe that foreign policy teaches us that you need a balance of powers, that not one nation, one country, one superpower is dominating everything, and the others have to obey. That is not a stable situation. A stable situation is a well-balanced equity of powers. Then you need to stick to international rules. and to international agreements. I was quite sad and disappointed to hear when President Trump quit the agreement from Paris on climate protection and also cancelled the agreement of the security powers with Iran on nuclear proliferations. That doesn't help us, in my opinion. I think the rule of law in the full sense of the word must be obeyed. That's the best recommendation I can give. Well, I know several people, like my friend Ban Ki-moon, for instance, who are much better experts on these issues. They are much nearer to the spot. What I can say is that until 2 years, I was thinking the problem cannot be solved reasonably. Eventually, the North Korean system could collapse, then a new situation is given, but that is also not a good solution. Then there will be many refugees, and then there will be a new change in power relations. So a peaceful, common solution would be the best. But whether the leader of North Korea can go so far and wants to go so far that he gives up his nuclear ambitions and is trusting and relying on agreements and on compromises and promises, or whether he says, my nuclear weapons are my life insurance. That is difficult to say for me. The only thing I know very well is no one must ever use nuclear weapons and must use nuclear weapons in a war against another nation. This is the most serious war crime you can imagine. Well, you are right in principle that Austria and Korea and the Republic of Korea are relative small countries and have big neighbors. But the size of the neighbors and the nature of the neighbors is, of course, different. Our relations to Italy, to France are without problems. I don't see real problems. We had a quarrel about South Tyrol, which was originally a part of Austria and is now a part of Italy. But the neighborhood between Austria and Germany and Italy and Switzerland and Hungary and Czech Republic is relative easy. The situation in Korea is different. But in all cases, we should rely on international law. We should respect decisions of the United Nations, and we should make a policy of good neighborhood, or a neighborhood as good as possible. And that helps us to create an atmosphere where then in a concrete situation, solutions are possible. But the Korean question is a very complicated question. But the German example shows us that even very complicated questions can be solved in a special hour with special chances.